I got some items to bunks upon a subway. It's a long way to go to get out to Leicester Square.
Hey everyone, it's Ivan, KitBadger.com, out here for another gear review, and today, talking about this guy right here, which is the JP Silent Capture Spring for the Law Tactical Folding Stock Adapter. Kind of a mouthful. Big picture, what is it? It is basically one unit that ends up replacing, in an AR platform, your buffer spring and your buffer. So the way this works is it sits back in here, and normal cycle of operations AR, fire round, goes down, gas bleeds off through the gas block, through the gas tube, pushes your bolt, releases your bolt comes back, makes contact with your buffer, comes back, compressing the spring, and then goes forward, strips another round, and you're ready to shoot again. This essentially does that, but instead of compressing a big spring, it basically runs on the shaft and compresses, I guess, a smaller spring and moves back like that. And this piece actually goes inside of your bolt carrier group, which is hollow, at least up towards the front. And yeah, that's basically how it works. And so they have made this for kind of all your standard ARs, as far as AR-15, AR-10, things like that. This one right here, though, is specifically for guns equipped with the Law Tactical Folding Stock Adapter. With it, there's a couple kind of nuanced differences, one of which, if you have a Law folder, there's an extension that basically extends your bolt carrier group to actually make contact with what would usually be your buffer and your spring, or really just your buffer that's captured with your spring. So this actually has a different extension because of the way this works, and this ends up basically dropping right back down in here, so it's captured. And charge it. So what exactly is that doing for us in our gun? Couple things. On just kind of the nicety side, makes it quieter, which is pretty nice, but it also just kind of smooths out that recoil impulse. Rather than having this buffer floating back here inside the spring and kind of going back and forth, bouncing around a little bit, you have something that is absolutely captured and it's really smooth. The whole thing, again, moves really smooth. That right there might not be appreciable until you go and pick up your AR, which has traditional spring and buffer, and do that, and it's like, and you hear it basically kind of grinding along back there. This is absolutely really smooth. They offer them in two different weights, both H or H2, in reference to kind of buffer weight, and yeah, they're pretty solid. As to my use with them, shot it a lot. Shot it on this gun, going cross country, 2021 coast to coast tour. Had a 5.56 upper on it, shot it across the country, and yeah, shot it a ton. Not only in all those coast to coast range days, but just on my personal gun, and including on this guy, shooting it, I don't know, shoot house runs, just different range sessions, stuff like that on this this setup as 300 Blackout Sugar Weasel. It was on the 5.56 one I had, but yeah, no, I've put a lot of rounds through it, and I will say it definitely shoots really, really smooth and consistent too. In my experience, have I ran into any issues or things I don't care for? We'll go ahead and start off with the cost. Nothing comes free, to include this. And I will say it makes the recoil impulse much smoother, in my experience, and absolutely way quieter. Quieter, again, just kind of a nicety. It does come at a cost, though, that being weight and arguably complexity. But this coupled, again, this one made specifically for the Law Tactical Folder, yeah, you're adding over a pound to your gun. Not just this, but this coupled with that Law Tactical Folder, which, depending on what you're trying for, that might be a lot. Granted, Law Tactical Folder allows you to basically take a gun that you otherwise could not carry dimensionally in the same space, whether it's a backpack or some sort of case, something like that, and allows you to carry it, which is pretty huge, but comes at the cost of weight. And again, this is arguably adding more weight than just kind of a standard buffer and spring, especially coupled with the extension and everything too. But have I ran into any issues? I have once. I think honestly it's pretty remote. And on the one hand, I will say there's these little, I don't know, call them moon shaped, basically these spacers, which different than kind of your traditional, I guess, any type of buffer or spring situation, in that you just throw that thing in the receiver extension on your gun. But these basically will drop in and they make contact with the back. They slide down your receiver extension. And what you're doing with these spacers is basically making sure that this is pressed up against the little detent capture here. You don't want this to have slack inside of your receiver extension. So use these spacers to basically kind of stack them until you have the appropriate amount of tension, to where it's just a little bit, just under tension, a tiny bit, basically keeping it in there. But the problem I ended up running into, oh yeah, and then you can also service extra O-rings, stuff like that, if these O-rings end up wearing out in between these weights here. The one issue I ran into, I think it's pretty unique, but it did happen, is, you may or may not be able to see, this little screw right here, it has kind of a built-in washer around it. And that screw is that one right there, all covered in carbon because I shoot things, don't usually clean them. But dimensionally, between those two screws, there was at one point kind of a flange that came off of that, similar to what is on this screw. Basically, this essentially a lip. And so that screw holds all this stuff together. You undo that, you can disassemble this thing. Well, that lip is making contact. So under the cycle of operations, as bolt carriers pushing this back, and then it's coming forward, it's stopping, and down inside of here, it essentially just kept beating on that metal flange there till finally it sheared off some pieces. So that right there does not look the same as this replacement right here. And it eventually sheared pieces off and basically hardlined my gun. That piece ended up going down through the bolt carrier, dropped into the lower receiver, wedged itself underneath the trigger. You could no longer fire the gun, which would have been pretty catastrophic if it wasn't just at a range day. I think that's probably pretty remote. I imagine there's probably a fix for it. I don't know what that fix is, but yeah, I think again, probably pretty remote, but after a lot of shooting, that eventually got beat up, sheared off, and that little like moon-shaped piece of metal dropped down in there and deadlined the gun. Does that mean it is going to happen with yours? No, absolutely not. But it did happen with mine, and honestly, I think it was just weird kind of fluke one-off thing. I have friends who use these in their competition guns, not with law tactical folders because they are competition guns, but zero problems whatsoever, and have thousands and thousands of rounds through them. They work great, and they definitely smooth out that recoil impulse. Maybe could have just been like a bad batch of screws, like materials-wise, which led to that basically breaking, but I reached out to JP. They were like, no, that should not happen. Sent me out that rehab kit, which I've yet to install. But overall, I think they're pretty solid, and it really comes down to what you're looking for. Who do I think this would be good for? Well, one, someone that has a Law Tactical folding stock adapter, because that's what this particular one's made for, and someone that wants to basically get the smoothest shooting gun they can, and nice and quiet. Quiet kind of being a nicety. But I will say that recoil impulse is really smooth with that. In part, again, like all of the things, this having an adjustable gas block and being tuned, coupled with that silent capture spring, makes for a really nice soft shooting gun. Really smooth. Does it matter? Totally depends on you. If you are kind of new to shooting, would you notice it? Don't know, couldn't tell you. If you shoot a lot and then you shoot a gun with one, yeah, you'll probably notice it. Again, makes for a really nice shooting experience. If you are deciding that you're going to make your end of the world gun and fixated on the most reliable thing ever, should you get it? I don't know. You're kind of adding parts and complexity. There's not much that can go wrong with just a buffer and a spring. But I will say, if you want a really smooth, soft shooting gun, yeah, that coupled with adjustable gas block makes for pretty sweet setup. Price wise, what are you looking? Well, they have two different ones. Again, H or H2, basically the buffer weight, and about 200 to about 240 bucks. Get them through places like Brownells. Is that expensive? It's really expensive compared to a spring and a buffer that your gun probably came with. But this, again, will absolutely make a really nice smooth shooting gun if that's something that's important to you. If not, stick with your standard spring and buffer. Absolutely. But this is an option, is definitely out there. And as I mentioned, this one made specifically for the Law Tactical folding stock adapter. Comes with not only that, but also your different extension for your bolt carrier group. And if you already have a JP silent capture spring, but you now have a Law Tactical folding stock adapter for, I believe, $100, basically a retrofit kit to set it up for your Law Tactical folding stock adapter. All in all, I think it's pretty cool, and again, depending on what you're looking for, can provide some value. But you can find them at different places, to include Brownells. And if you appreciate my content and want to support it, greatly appreciate it. Whether it's liking and sharing videos or supporting me directly through Patreon, stuff helps me go out, create more content for you. And if you guys have questions for me, happy to answer them. Probably not in the comments section, but over there on Patreon, we have an active Discord. Happy to answer all your questions over there. And as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Education, a fist that cuts me out in his backstreet education.